Podcasting worldwide from Vancouver, Canada. Welcome back to the Personal Process Podcast. The show that takes you through the growth, hardship, self-discovery, lessons, and stories of individuals who achieved success in their own personal path. Trust the process.
Okay, welcome back to the Personal Process Podcast. Today's guest, Tom Loughlin, Marine, firefighter, and, he's served all around the world. He has an amazing handlebar mustache. So if you guys aren't seeing this on YouTube, definitely come on over. I'm jealous of it, to be honest. And Tom, how are you doing today, sir?
Great. Got off work this morning, had a good nap, so I'm fired up and ready to go.
Man, we're really happy to have you. So Tom, do you mind just kind of taking us, just through your childhood, just so we see how you got here? So where were you born?
Sure. I was born in New York City. Mm-hmm. A little bit of a rough beginning, tough family life, I guess you'd say. Mother and father split when I was real young. I'm the youngest of three boys.
Right.
Later in life, found out four boys.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, I met a younger half brother later on. So I thought I was the youngest, and it turned out I wasn't. But in any event, there was a very messy divorce between my mother and father. Mm-hmm. We wound up with my father, and in the process, we're moving more north up the Hudson Valley, away from New York City in the process of that. So I went to elementary school a little bit north of New York City. Mm-hmm. When I say rough childhood, part of it was self-inflicted because I started acting out as a young kid and kind of wound up in the system of boys' homes and things like that.
Right.
Was a pretty good student until about 10th grade, when I guess felt like I was bored and sort of checked out and just stopped kind of going to school and started doing all those juvenile delinquent things, skipping school and getting in trouble and all this other stuff. So
yeah,
ultimately wound up here in the States. They have what's called the GED, which is a general equivalency. So I'm sure there's something similar there as well.
Yeah.
And from there, I actually enlisted in the Marines, which sort of was like a childhood dream. I was convinced that I was going to do it. If I was going to do it, it was going to be the Marines and nothing else. And I walked into the recruiter's office one day and said, "This is what I want to do," and they accommodated that. So off I went to Parris Island, and that was definitely life-changing.
So just take me through this. What made you want to be a Marine? What was it about it?
Well, I could tell you, going back a little bit to childhood stuff. I definitely had issues as far as not good enough and tough enough and all this other stuff. And this was the big target. This was if you can make it through this, nobody can tell you, anything otherwise at that point. So, and I think I had very, very loose contact with my father still. And I think I basically wanted to just be able to more or less show him, hey, look, I am tough enough, could get through it. I could stick with it. And, that was probably my biggest motivation. But once I got there, my biggest motivation was the fastest way off of Parris Island is to graduate.
So Tom, do you mind just kind of going in for the viewers, what is Parris Island? Because even I'm not too sure.
Sure. So the Marine Corps has two boot camps and two boot camps only. There's a West Coast and an East Coast. If you live east of the Mississippi River, you attend Parris Island. If you live west of Mississippi, you go to San Diego. Right. If you ask anyone who's been to Parris Island, they will tell you it's the tougher of the two, and vice versa if you ask anyone who went to San Diego. So there's a big thing between the East Coast and West Coast Marines. The East Coast Marines call the San Diego ones Hollywood Marines. So it's this big thing. But I left in June and graduated in September. One thing about the Marines is it's a full month longer than the other services, of boot camp. So leaving in June and graduating September was just a brutally hot time in September for a kid from New York. I had never been exposed, I guess, to sand fleas and that kind of humidity and all that sort of stuff. So it was one long summer for me, but I did well and graduated boot camp. They had given me a meritorious promotion out of boot camp. So I picked up a rank just for being in boot camp, which was nice. I graduated as a private first class, way high up the ladder.
That's fantastic. So
I need to, but I put I all my effort into, doing well and performing well. And it kind of suited me because in that sort of structure, there was no question as to what was expected of you.
Yep.
And, you just do what the guy wants. He's going to yell at you anyway, but you just do what they want. And, you'll do fine. So,
yeah. So Tom, kind of some follow-up questions regarding that.
Yeah, sure.
If you had the opportunity to go back in time and revisit boot camp, and knowing the experience that you know now, what is one thing that you wish you would have known prior to going into Parris Island?
It's going to sound funny, but one thing I think I would have, I wish I would have known was how much running I was going to be doing, because I was woefully unprepared. I've never been a runner. And if there was one thing that I would say that I struggled with, was there was a very quick learning curve of I had this big pride thing of never falling back and never dropping out of a run. So to try and keep that commitment was very tough, because there were times that you just, I wish I had given myself more prep time maybe to get in a better running shape.
For sure. And are we talking how many kilometers miles? I guess you're in the States. So
hard to gauge, because you're never really informed of anything. I just know that you know nothing about anything that's going on. You just run till they say stop. I know that in the fleet, when I got out into the Marines, into, my regular battalion where I was assigned, the physical fitness test is based on a 3-mile run.
Right.
And it wasn't unusual in the fleet to do 5, 7, and 10K, just as a regular morning PT type of thing.
That is impressive.
They pride themselves on that. Not that, a lot of, at that time of your life too. I mean, the vast majority of you are between 18 and 24. And some of these older guys, staff sergeants and higher, that are 35 they have learned the art of the shuffling of the feet, so they're not expending too much energy, and they know all the techniques to keep up. So they're setting the pace, and you're keeping up as an 18-year-old, and you just don't know how they're doing it.
Yeah, and I guess kind of going into your experience for training, what's one thing that you're grateful to have gone through that may have been difficult? Doesn't necessarily have to be, but now you're looking back to it, and you're like, wow, I'm really happy I went through that experience.
Well, I really think the whole experience provided, I think, a whole different outlook for me as to how I should conduct myself or just carry myself. I think it instilled, a lot of people say they go for discipline and things like that. And I think it was just something that was sorely needed in my world. It was just something that I was completely lacking. And it sort of provided, it gave me a framework and a structure to, as a young adult, to be within and to do well, where I was always a loophole kid and would find every loophole, whether it was having to do with attendance at school or boys' home type stuff. When I enlisted in the Marines, it was from a group home that was in a regular neighborhood, and it wasn't very strict, like a juvenile place or anything like that. It was a very much, they tried to make much like home life as they could, and I was the kid that would try to get over every chance I could. And a very manipulative young kid. So
but okay, wow, yeah, no, that's very interesting. And kind of just to even follow up on this experience, are you familiar with Jocko Willink? Okay, so Jocko Willink's one of these, I believe he was a Marine as well, and
I have heard he does podcasts, and
Yeah.
I've got a friend that actually refers to him quite a bit. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So Jocko Willing, he once mentioned that, a lot of people go into the Marines, they get disciplined, and then after they kind of give up on it. With your own experience, being you're working just as a firefighter, or are you currently in the Marines as well? Sorry.
No. I've been out since 1997. Been a long
Okay.
time.
So just a while, yeah, just a couple of days. So like, what's your experience post that? Like, have you been able to carry on the discipline? Have you had to, change your life in a certain way, or?
I think for the most part, yes. And part of my story is I had a rough transition after leaving the Marines of trying to find my niche in life,
Right.
like what was going to make me happy, or what did I want to do for work, and I was completely unhappy. I twisted in the wind for quite a few years, actually, of not knowing what I wanted to do, and that sort of leads into seeking out getting into the fire service. That was something I had done on and off on a volunteer basis as a
Right.
kid, and it had always kind of caught my interest for whatever reason. And that was really on the fire side, because in New York, fire and EMS are two totally different things,
Right.
and they don't really cross paths very much.
Right.
Down here in Florida, they're inextricably entwined.
Right.
So having got back into the fire service, which is very regimented, the structure is probably about as similar as you're going to find outside of the military. I think I do better in those sort of environments, and maybe that's part of the reason why I sought it out. I think without that, I would have been probably kind of unhappy, and so that keeping that structure after the Marine, or keeping some modicum of discipline, I guess, was just really important as far as, I guess, my own personal happiness and all that sort of stuff. A certain amount of it, I think I had to hold on to just keep myself, engaged.
No, for sure. And, there are a lot of individuals who have gone through not the exact same, but, tougher upbringings. Would you recommend people to go into this stream, whether it be Navy, Army, or, firefighter, with some sort of structured activities?
I think the two being separate. The military is definitely not for everybody, but I do. I've often been asked, if you had a child, would you be okay with him going in the Marines? And if I believe if it's something a person really wants to do, like, which was my case, there was no talking me out of it. So there's nothing more bullheaded than a teenage boy.
Oh yeah.
As far as, it's not for everybody, and I've seen people get in for the wrong reasons. And I've seen, even in Parris Island and boot camp, some people really, really had some mental breakdowns there, where they just couldn't handle it. And I don't know each individual story, but I do know that there were folks that were there, maybe because their relative was in and they wanted to kind of emulate them, or and just it just wasn't something they themselves wanted to do. Where I think if a person has personal motivation to do it, by all means, have at it. But it's certainly not for everybody. And I saw it negatively affect a number of people, to where I think I would tell anybody, think long and hard. It's quite a commitment, and you're going to get there in the first 24 hours, and you're going to say, what was I thinking? Even if you really wanted to do it. So, separately from that, though, fire and EMS, I believe, and this is going to sound like a very extreme statement, but I believe getting into professional firefighting, and especially EMS, literally saved my life.
Saved your life?
I think so, yeah. I had struggled with a whole lot of stuff after the military, as far as like depression, PTSD, things like that, and just, what am I going to do with my life, and all this other stuff. And getting into particularly EMS, I came in a very weird route. I came through being a vet tech, working for veterinarians, to developing an interest in human medicine, and the ability to help people, quote unquote, on their worst day, and to sometimes see very tangible results. I mean, someone's having a heart attack and you could stop it, with really aggressive treatment, sometimes right in its tracks to get them to the cath lab. And I think did wonders for me to sort of get on top of some personal struggles I had, and to really start to have a desire to fix some of the things that were bugging me for a long time, years wise. So the ability to help people, I think there's an old saying that if you want to fix your self-esteem, do esteemable things. And that was something I think that was again at the time that came along in my life. There's some things that appeared at the perfect right time and just fell the absolute correct way. And for example, I had no desire to stay or to live in Florida, but the things just fell the exact perfect way where here I am. I'm perfectly happy. And, I'm only about 8 years out from retirement at this point. So some things just work out.
Yeah. So Tom, one thing that I actually forgot to mention in the beginning is thank you very much for your service. You double thank you for your service, right? From the Marines to where you are now. And, you've done a lot. And one interesting point that I kind of just want to expand on a bit, you mentioned that if you want to help your own self-esteem, help others' self-esteem. And there's actually one research study that was conducted at my home university. And what they had is they had individuals who either had got to, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, it's probably a little off, but the general point is correct. They either gave a $5 bill or took a $5 bill, and then they self-reported their happiness. The interesting thing was, you'd assume that if they took the $5 bill, they'd be happier, but they weren't. When they gave it, they were happier.
Right.
And this kind of fits into the fact that you were, saying that you need to help others and you feel better. And that's true. I've recently started to focus more, pre-COVID, when we could actually go out and do all these fun things, focus more on volunteering and all that kind of stuff. And you just feel, I don't know if I can speak for you, Tom, you just feel more at ease. You feel more content.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that's also one of the big tenets of a lot of the self-help or 12-step programs or any of it. I think that's, even in some of the Eastern religions, it's to me, it's just, if it's been around for thousands and thousands of years as a suggestion, maybe it's worth following. So, but that's exactly the way it happened for me, when it comes to accidentally finding something that filled a void that I kind of didn't even know I had. And like I said, after the military, it was a very rough transition to kind of stumble across something that I said, yeah, this is it. This is where it's at. And and there's no, one thing with me too, is I have to stay busy.
Right.
I'm just a very, I guess, energetic person who's got to have my hands in a bunch of things at one time in order to I think half stay out of trouble, but also to be satisfied. And
absolutely,
there's lots of room to grow with EMS. The fire side of things, the older I get, the more physical, laborious it is, and the more it's dragging hose around and putting the wet stuff on the red stuff. And don't get me wrong, I love the adrenaline with it. We just had a big giant fire the other day that was I wouldn't say fun, but you get worked up, and there's a certain amount of adrenaline with it. But with the EMS side, I've found the ability to advance and grow, and I'm a teacher. I teach advanced cardiac life support, and I teach basic life support, and I work for a hospital critical care transport system. And there's just so many areas to branch out and just study, which is funny because I went in the Marines partly because I didn't really want anything to do with college, and I've never stopped doing classes since. So it's been nonstop, and right now I'm studying for another certificate, a critical care transport certificate, and it's just more deep and scientific than anything I've ever gotten into, as far as detecting blood gases and vent settings and this and that and the other. It's the same as what the helicopter transport is, except for my time in the Marines has taught me that there are two kinds of helicopters: ones that have crashed and ones that are likely to. So I don't really want anything to do with helicopters.
Fair enough. Yeah,
so I've had enough of them. Yeah,
no, fair enough. So Tom, before we go back into your main process, we covered a lot here, and I really enjoy that. But I don't want to miss out on the Marines, because we didn't even talk about finishing the training, let alone going in around the world and all that kind of jazz. And I don't want to take away from that. So one thing that I just want to ask you, you're mentioning that you went out of school grade 10 and you didn't really like learning too much, but then now you're going above and beyond learning courses, even you were saying 6 years before retirement, like what gave you this drive to learn? Is there anything that could, help other people get this passion so they can go forward?
I think I've always had that as far as learning goes. I think with school, I got bored.
Okay.
I think that I think I've always had a very inquisitive nature or a desire to learn, but school absolutely bored me. And I think along with other things that were going on in my world back at that age, maybe that all contributed to it. But as far as, the desire to learn, I think anything that a person finds himself passionate about. For example, at 18, when I got into the military and they give you a big thick book in boot camp and they say, this is all the history and traditions and the way you're supposed to do things. Like I was a sponge, soaking that up. And same thing when I got into the vet tech world. I just, it's something new. It was something that I was passionate about. I had an interest in. And so I just soaked in as much as I could. And that's, I think, always been part of my nature to a certain degree. So once I found something that, like, they say it's the same thing with training a dog. If you find, what drives that dog, whether it's a tug toy or a tennis ball or a treat, the dog's going to perform if he has the proper drive. And I don't know that that's a lot different for humans.
That's really true. Yeah. And, that's kind of the sad part about the educational system in Canada. And I think in the States as well, there's a lot of, you have to study this, you have to study this, you have to study this. And it's like, what if that's just not what I'm about? What if that's not something that I want to go down in? And it's a shame because a lot of individuals may, leave school and just never come back to anything. So, yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why and maybe it's the same in Canada, but there's kids that thrive in vocational schools that in a classroom, setting is not really their cup of tea, but vocational schools, or they finally get somewhere, say like the military, and they just blossom,
Yeah.
There's got a better way. That's for sure.
No, for sure. And hopefully we change that thing up. But anyways, bringing it back. So huge bring back. Rewind. So we're at Camp Paris and, we talked about what we learned. We talked about the things we wish we knew. What else? Is there anything else in this segment of Camp Paris that you think that the viewers would get some value from? Or you go ahead, you take this wherever you like.
I think that, like I said, some people really had a tough time with it. In my mind, I viewed it like they almost had a role to play. So I almost looked at it like it was a big TV show, almost like they were playing characters. And that's, I guess maybe that was to make it easier on myself. But I would say for anyone going there, realize, or for I think any military basic training, none of it's personal. None of it's personal. I believe they know on day number 4 they're going to pick out the 16th person in the line, and it's just going to be a circus. And I think that as long as people understand it's not for everybody if they think it through and decide it's something they want to do, and just realize none of it's personal, and the fastest way to get through it is to graduate.
I love that. Do you have any tips for how to take it not personally? Kind of a vague question.
I think just that to go into it knowing they have a role to play. That if you perform to the I hate to say to the minimum standard, but that'll get you through. I'm not saying aim for the minimum, but they certainly have standards that need to be met, and your number is going to come up sooner or later. There's never been a person in history to remain anonymous all the way through boot camp. So they are going to pick you out at some point or another, whether you're right or wrong or indifferent. And it's almost you got to play the game almost, So it is what it is. But I also think it is a ton of new maybe information that a person's never been exposed to before, and it's a lot to cram in, and there's not a lot of time for remediation. So I would say as much as possible, soak in as much as possible, and try to be a sponge is the best thing I could say.
That's fantastic. So, Tom, we got through boot camp. What happened next?
So I got stationed out in California, out in the Mojave Desert, big 537,000 square acre base of almost nothing but desert, open desert in the Mojave called 29 Palms, and it's the Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center. Big bombing ranges, big open training areas. They do what's called combined armed exercises there, where they bring in foreign military forces and train with them. And the big draw to that place is they can do basically everything from naval gunfire to bombardment to artillery to infantry maneuvers. And I was assigned to an infantry battalion. So we spent a lot of time in the desert. But aside from that, we spent a lot of time deployed, because the way the Marine Corps works may be different a little bit now with all the deployments, but every couple of years you would go for 6 months to Okinawa. So here you'd go from this climate of hot and dry to jungle. And they sort of did that on purpose, and they would intersperse that with some training, like up in Bridgeport, California, in the high Sierras for mountain warfare stuff. So there was just a lot of bouncing around and different training. My particular job had to do with ammunition. I was an ammunition technician, which basically I would issue out and retrograde all the ammunition and explosives for 1,000 infantry Marines.
Right.
So it was a little bit technical, because you had I went through an Army school in Alabama to learn the job. It was a Marine Corps detachment at an Army base, the missile and munitions place down in Redstone Arsenal, Alabama. Right. There was no shortage of travel, that's for sure. But I got to get out and out as far as the bases and things like that. They do just a lot of continuous training, and there was a lot of deployments as well. So whether it was Okinawa or Somalia, like I mentioned earlier, the unit I was with had just come back from Desert Shield, turned right around, spent a few, maybe a year at home, and went right back overseas. Yep. After I got out, it wasn't that much longer after that these guys are doing 6 and 8 and 9 deployments. So I'm kind of glad I missed all that. I did go through a very quick marriage during that time as well. So and there was a lot of troubles caused by being gone all the time and stuff like that. So that's also something else folks to consider is it's not easy as far as that goes. So
what would your advice be for individuals who are considering getting married or are married and going off to these sort of missions?
They go way far out of their way, and I said earlier that you can't tell a teenage boy nothing. And they go out of their way to make it a point to say, prior to going to boot camp, don't run off and get married. After you get out of boot camp, don't run off and get married. I would certainly, having had the experience that 1,000 people told me, hold off. There's no rush. I think it certainly, whether it was myself or 100 other people just in my battalion alone, it caused a ton of problems and a ton of distraction for, when you're overseas and trying to, fix some kind of what would otherwise be like a inane domestic issue of, I don't know, a car registration or something like that. And when you're overseas, it's just amplified that much more because you really can't do much more about it. But she's frustrated or the other, the spouse is frustrated. And then if you had kids with that, it's a tough gig to stay on top of. So that's pretty much my advice would be to avoid it if at all possible. Wait till you're a little more settled and established. That first enlistment is just a big learning curve. So
fair enough. And Tom, kind of even dialing a little bit back, when you mentioned you went to Okinawa, is that the first country that you visited outside the United States?
Somalia was.
So so Somalia is obviously, very different from Canada in a lot of ways. Or sorry, not Canada, the United States. Canada too, though.
Either or, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess, did you feel any culture shock? Did you feel anything that you wouldn't have expected before going there?
So when we first got to Somalia, we were literally the first large number of boots on the ground. The only ones that were there before us was Navy SEALs and Marine Corps reconnaissance, and of course CNN was there before us. But
Yeah.
So it was chaos when we first got there. We landed on a pockmarked a runway at the Mogadishu airport, and there was just shooting going on everywhere. So I guess that's something that you just don't, they tell you keep your head on a swivel and expect this and expect that. But coming off the plane, handing out ammo, I was one of the first off the plane and was handing the load, the combat load to everybody as they were coming off. A couple things really stay with me to this day. The amount of, I guess, sudden realization that the shooting you're hearing is real. This is not training. And wow, that sounds a lot closer than I'm comfortable with. But also, it's going to sound funny, but the smell of there was, it's hard to describe, but the smell of just burning tires and trash, and it just it smelled like definitely like the saying from Wizard of Oz, you're not in Kansas anymore. You definitely knew that you were somewhere overseas, and I think as a young kid that didn't really, I don't think, hit me until that moment of like, wow, this is all pretty real. And going back to everything to do with Paris Island and boot camp and all that, and I'm like, well, they don't go through all that for just fun. So all of a sudden now everything is real. So that very much a growing up moment.
Yeah. And do you mind, I'm not sure how much of this you can share, so feel free to just disregard it if possible, but with regards to your deployment to Somalia, what was the general situation there? Did you get any briefings? Like, how was it? This is the first time you're going there. Like, how was your experience? At first you were, shocked. But what happened after?
Well, for me, I had just, pretty much gotten out of boot camp and had gotten to my unit, and the commotion was already gearing up. Everyone was expecting to be going.
Right.
There's definitely a lot of hurry up and wait in any of these organizations, but I think the general consensus was we're just waiting for the phone to ring. So my check-in process was very hurried, very rushed.
Right.
And as far as they had got us together in the movie theater as a unit, and kind of covered the rules of engagement and what to expect, and they did slideshows and went over everything from like the poisonous venomous snakes to cultural differences, what to expect if you interact with the local population. So there was a little preparation for that. I can't say that we had initially a lot of contact with the locals. In time, we did maybe a little bit more, but as time went on and we got moved around the country a little bit, started off in Mogadishu and moved to other locations, we certainly interacted. I had the opportunity to interact with some French Foreign Legion, some Australian Marines.
Wow.
So there's quite a bit of interaction, and I had the ability to travel because I was running back and forth to resupply ammo and things. I had lots of interaction with other folks, and when you're places like that, trading and bartering becomes like a major form of currency. So they had stuff we wanted, I had stuff they wanted. So but as far as being prepared for the locals, they did all that through briefings and things like that. But it was no other way to say it other than there was different factions that were fighting against each other. So it was like a civil war with multiple players, and food had become a weapon. And there was, we wound up being sent, I think it was immediately following the murder of some aid workers. Food shipments were intercepted, and bad things were definitely happening, and these different warlords were sort of doing their thing. So they kind of threw us in there as muscle to stop that from happening. We would escort food shipments and all that sort of stuff. So. So it went very quickly from a humanitarian mission to a combat mission, very, very quickly.
Was there sorry, do you mind repeating that, Tom?
As far as what they were having us focus on, we went there and they said, it's a dangerous place, but it was more of a humanitarian. You're going to escort food and this and that and the other thing. And we got there, wound up in the crossfire. We one faction would try and draw us in, against another one, and everyone's familiar with the Black Hawk Down story. That happened months after I even left the country. So when we got there, it was a lot more chaotic than even that portrayed.
Wow.
Some of the places in that movie, I remember walking, Bouquet Market, the place they had all the guns and ammunition hanging and things like that in the movie. And I remember being right there, and it was just even more chaotic. So it was they had prepared us for all that, but it seemed like the focus changed very early on from escort food to more of a either keep these two factions at bay from becoming more powerful, or they would very rarely directly attack us. So we definitely had them outgunned and outnumbered and all these things. So they didn't very often do that, but they would test it sometimes.
Yeah. Wow. And, like, if you could go back in this time and you could maybe change some of the things that you've done, or even the strategies you'd have advised your team or anyone else in your battalion, is that the proper term for it?
The bigger, the 1,000-person thing is the battalion, and that gets broken down to company and then, further down from there. So the battalion is what I deployed with, the 1,000 people that got up and went.
Yeah. So if you could, after you've gone to Somalia and you've seen what it was like, and you could go back in time and revisit that, is there anything else that, you would talk about with your team members differently, or with even the actions that you've done yourself?
I think the one thing I would do is talk more. Not just keep everything in a vault. Definitely saw a lot of just bad things. People emaciated, people starving, incredible violence. Sometimes very up close and personal.
Right.
And I think at the time, it was a tough guy sort of thing, and none of the current, like today with all the resources available for like PTSD and all these sort of things, and knowing what they know now about all that sort of stuff. Well, none of that was around in the 1990s. So I think if anything, it would be talk more and talk openly, because I think that definitely had a really negative effect on me. Years after I got out, I went, just down a difficult road like a lot of people do after they get out. And that's why when I say that, like, getting into fire and EMS, I feel like literally saved my life. I mean, I don't know. It was very bleak for me. So, I would say talk more is the emphatic thing I would push.
Absolutely. So Tom, kind of, bringing up that point about, mental health and all that kind of jazz.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of guys hear the term, be a man, don't cry, suck it up. Especially, in terms that are in jobs that are, usually more for, tough people, like firefighting, and things of that nature. So what would your advice be to these people that have just constantly heard these messages?
Well, the benefit of now being 47 years old and having pretty broad experience from the military, fire, EMS, I think we're very lucky to be in a time now where it's definitely recognized as something that is it's certainly not healthy to just quote unquote be a man, suck it up, put it away, put it on a box, put it on a shelf. I mean, I've become convinced it will manifest itself in a million different ways if a person does that. I think rare is the person who can literally not be affected by some of the horrible stuff that's out there. And the world is just a brutal place sometimes. And I think on top of being lucky to be in the time we're in, I think that it's it appears to me it's certainly an ongoing thing as far as how they develop the care and treatment. For example, the IAFF, the International Association of Firefighters, the big firefighter union between the U.S. and Canada,
That's right.
has what they call a center. I think it's called Center for Excellence in Recovery, and it's a physical place in Maryland,
Right.
and they kind of are helping write the book, so to speak, on the multi-pronged treatment of people who have substance issues with alcohol or whatever, along with PTSD, because often those type of things are hand in hand. When people experience trauma, a lot of times they turn to self-medicating, and I think we're lucky to live in a time where a lot of this is being kind of sorted out a little bit, to where 25 years ago there was just not a lot of options as far as getting good quality treatment or a full understanding of how these things work. But I think you could see that just in veteran suicides, or first responder suicides for that matter. I don't think there's a big difference as far as the numbers go, as percentage wise and things. So the help is definitely out there. That was something that I did struggle with, some mental health stuff and some PTSD stuff. And I, for years, denied that I had PTSD. For example, I mean, and who knows, in my particular case, who knows if it was from childhood or from this or from that or whatever. But it was, over time, it started to become very clear to me that I was exhibiting some of the behaviors or traits that were just quite textbook. But I just, I had grown up under that, be a tough guy, be this, be that, and had certain views of how that was going to be. And I thought it just was something it took a long time to come to terms with, I think. And when I finally did, I will say this, when I finally did sort of say, I was at a crossroads of something was going to give. Yep. And I either got to fix this, or we're going down a really bad road here, a very dark period of my life. And I was very lucky. I had some people around me who sort of recognized that and really encouraged me, to utilize the VA, the Veterans Administration, and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of resources available. I finally decided to use some of that, and I will tell you that although it wasn't easy, I don't regret a single second of any of that, because what a night and day difference between where I was at, say around the turn of the century, around the year 2000. I was just really just not, I just almost was like a shell of myself, and was not going in a good direction. And I think that the ability to get that turned around made a world of difference. So that's a topic of and by itself. But yeah, it's definitely was an ongoing, some of the car accidents or violence that you may see on different calls. The saying goes, nobody calls EMS when they're having a good day. Nobody calls 911. Nobody calls 911 just to say, how are you? So there's the occasions where you can absolutely help somebody. For example, I had a lady who just didn't quite feel right. And based on my experience, I said something really neurologically seems wrong with her. So we were able to call with basically a stroke alert. Come to find out, she actually had a bleed going on inside of her brain. Wow. And she went immediately to CT and immediately to surgery, which likely that rapid sequence very likely either saved her life completely or maybe stopped her from having deficits. So that's one of those times that you can just feel great, like, all right, yeah, had a direct impact on this person. But then there's the other times where, it's just a horrible, massive car accident, and people are just not going to survive these things. And you've got to do something with that. You've got to process that in a certain healthy way. So I'm really just glad that the support and the general attitude towards that stuff over the years has really come around to address it. Because it's unavoidable. You're certainly going to see that. And that's for anyone who's considering getting into, a first responder type job, police, fire, EMS, any of it. It's unavoidable, and that does make a lot of careers very short, So
Yeah,
longevity is something you have to work on in this field.
absolutely. So Tom, just to, I guess, give your 40 plus years of experience, how would you think would be the best way to even move forward to even better the way that we're addressing this problem right now? What do you think we could do? Could we maybe talk about how to foster better communication regarding these kind of topics in school? How would you take that?
I think overall it's on the right track.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that more is being revealed as they go. I think there's a lot of trial and error.
Yep.
I think we went from anecdotal to evidence-based research, and
Yep.
as time plays out, more kind of will reveal itself as to what's effective and what's not. You mentioned, maybe earlier on in kids' lives, like school age. I feel terrible for these kids who have to like train for school shootings and
Yeah.
stuff that I never had to, even consider. I think it's imperative that they start dealing with things like that, because we're now exposing children to a much heavier mental stress load than my carefree 7 or 8 year old self,
Yeah.
sort of was. My biggest concern was, what was going to happen when I got home, and school was a very safe place.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it's like to be on edge there. And then a kid who's got a crazy home life too, how they're just constantly just, tense. I think if we started dealing with that at an early age, I should mention that it was because of my school that I was removed from my house. They recognized it was an abusive situation first in kindergarten, and nothing really came of that. And then again, as a preteen, and they were the ones that got the ball rolling and said something's wrong here.
Right.
So I think school is such a big part of a kid's life that they probably see you as much, if not more, than most other people. So they can almost tell when something's not right. And I think that it's heading in the right direction, but I do think school age children maybe more help preparing, recognizing signs and symptoms of negative stuff, or the school staff themselves taking more. And I think a lot of it comes back to have smaller class sizes and more interaction. Teachers during COVID certainly are not going to be able to do that during Zoom, distance learning or whatever. But just the interaction with their kids and their children, and knowing what's normal and what's not, and all that sort of stuff. I think we could probably do a better job of that.
Absolutely. Just knowledge after knowledge. I appreciate your experience there. So, this is a very important point, guys. If you guys are feeling, guys, girls, whatever you identify as, if someone's going on, find someone to talk to, whether it's a friend, family member, or even someone on a support line. That initial step can change your life and can even save your life, right? So going back, we keep going back. You just keep giving good knowledge. I can't stop you. So, you're out in Somalia. We're talking about mental health, and, we're seeing all of this crazy stuff. So what goes on next, Tom?
So I along with all that was, I hit some pretty rocky ground. I had mentioned a marriage didn't work out too well, and that was that. I'm going to kind of gloss over it a little bit, but after coming back from Somalia, I gave a senior Marine a place to live because he had been given divorce papers, and 6 weeks later walked in on something I shouldn't have. So needless to say, as a 21-year-old Marine, it turned ugly. It created just a difficult situation, to say the least. So ultimately, I'd considered maybe re-enlisting and staying in for, maybe a career, but that really colored how I felt about things. At that point, I had like a big focus on being away from all that. And so ultimately I finished and left the Marines with an honorable discharge, into not really knowing what I wanted to do, because I think that all of a sudden something that I was completely in love with, ready to stay with as a career, now to me wasn't even an option, and I wasn't sure what to do. And this marriage thing had, fallen to pieces, and still had a lot of mental baggage from, some of the things in Somalia and so on and so forth. So the next years were the not so good times. So between 1997 and the early 2000s were just a rough go. A time of bad decisions and bad remedies and all that stuff. So it took some doing to get on top of that, and that's why I'm so emphatic about getting on top of any of the stuff that's really negatively affecting your life. Because I think in my case, if I hadn't done that, I would have kept just going on a trajectory I was on, and you kind of revert to what you know. And as a kid, I guess the best way to put it is I knew how to survive. Well, there's a difference between surviving and living, and doing things that are enjoyable and all this other stuff. And I think I reverted back to that. I just was now again surviving things, and just a terrible place to be. So long story real short, when I found myself here I was in my 30s having a existential midlife crisis of what am I going to do, and what do I want to be when I grow up? It almost like out of the clouds came to me that, like, Tom, you were willing to do the fire department for free. Why don't you pursue it? For something you get paid for, and that's what I did. And my interest initially was in the EMS side of things. Not so much the fire side, but I went to my here in Florida, you have to get your EMT basic first, and then there's no middle level. It's EMT, then paramedic. EMT is not able to do invasive skills where a paramedic can, administer medications, intubate, and all these other things. So like a PCP would be in Canada. When I went to that school, the instructor happened to be the hiring captain for one of the big fire departments in the area. And he pulled me aside after class. Like I say, things just fell absolutely. I really don't believe in coincidences, but he pulled me aside after class one day and said, "Look, you really need to go to fire academy here in Florida." And I pushed back a little bit against it and said, not really. I just really want to do the EMS thing. And he said, "Listen, you're going to wind up working for a private company, and it's very difficult to put together a retirement." He said, "I'm telling you, it's a great career. You should consider it, blah, 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 blah." So I told him, "Let me think about it." And he said, if you decide you want to do it, he said, "I'll get you in the very next class." And that was one of the holdups, was that I understood that there was a long waiting list, and they sort of had a certain amount of slots that were held for them, where if they wanted to get somebody in, they could. And I came back the very next day and said, "I've been thinking about it, and that's a good idea." So everything has just fallen right into place from there, because I went to my EMT school. I started paramedic school, which is a year. I got about a third of the way through it. I was volunteering at the fire department I work at. An opening came up. I'd already been more or less auditioning. I'd been there as a reserve with them, and so got on with the fire department. And the only bad thing was they took me out of the school I was in and put me into a different school, and the credits weren't transferable. But it is what it is. They paid for the rest of school for paramedic, and it's just been something that I've thrived in it. I should mention, I actually had, and I should have mentioned this in the email, but one of the things that happened to me, talk about surviving things, was in November of 2015, I had a burst aneurysm.
Oh my God.
In my left cerebral artery. Happened while I was at work. Here in Florida, they have something called a heart and lung bill, where anything cardiac or respiratory is presumed to be work-related. Well, anyway, this happened at work. I literally was pumping a fire truck when it happened. And, got a typical thunderclap headache and the guy who was, we were doing like an annual proficiency sort of testing. So it was a whole evolution. The firefighters were flowing foam. It was a fuel fire. I was pumping the truck at certain pressures. And so the administrator was there with the clipboard, and he's asking me like, what pressures am I pumping this at or that at? And the gauges started to get very fuzzy. Then along came the headache. I asked him, I said, are we good? Are we done? He said, yes. I said, I'm gonna shut it down. And normally I would throttle down the pump back to an idle, but it's got a kill switch. And I just hit the kill switch and immediately dropped to my knees. Like it was that sort of excruciating pain. I thought I had a migraine. I had never had one before, and I was like, wow, these things really are terrible. That's why people say they're miserable. And I actually went home for 2 or 3 days before driving myself back to the fire department. And in my mind, I drove back and walked in and said, hey, something's not right. Let's go ahead and go to the hospital. That's not what happened at all. They said that I walked in dragging one leg behind me, lots of facial droop. I mean, it was clear I was having a stroke. In my mind, I was talking normal. They couldn't understand a word I said. They put me on a stretcher, put me on a monitor. My heart rate was like 29 or 30. I was just, on the brink. And, fast forward a couple hours later, I'm getting, brain surgery to get it repaired. And just like that, something came, could have been the end of everything. But, when I say everything fell perfectly, maybe it wasn't the smartest thing to go home for a couple days, but I did find myself back to my fire station with my guys putting me on a stretcher, taking me to the appropriate place. And for something that a person doesn't often survive, I just somehow survived that. So I've had more than my fair share of lucky breaks, and I'm not looking to press the the issue too much more, but things have fallen just well for me. And the thing that made that pop into my mind, it was so I'd gotten a surgery, and I was very lucky. They were able to go in through a vein in my my hip and go all the way up and repair it. The neurosurgeon was telling me that, for someone to survive is incredible. For someone to survive with no lasting deficits and be able to go right back to work, et cetera, et cetera. I think it was 45 days later, I actually sat and took the test for engineer, a lieutenant position, and got the spot. So, just things have fallen just well for me. So it's when I feel like it's something that I am supposed to be doing, or I should be doing, or by design that I'm in the right spot. I think I have enough evidence to convince myself anyway. So.
Absolutely. And sorry, Tom, that I was laughing in a certain segment of when you were mentioning your story. It's just that, although I don't condone, if you think you're having a stroke, to, push through the amounts of mental toughness.
I would laugh too, because it's a bizarre thing to hear. I mean, it's just but it's the way it happened. And it's funny when I tell people they often have that same reaction. Like I said, hey, this would all be comical to me too. Except it was,
it was happening to you and it was real.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm glad looking back that I really at the time had no idea of the seriousness of it all. And,
absolutely.
I just knew I had this incredible headache that wasn't going away. By the time I got back myself to the fire department, they had given me enough pain medicines, I'm sure, for a horse. And they said it was very difficult for me to get my pain level down from that headache to even something that was manageable for the short transport I had. So, I don't remember much of it. I'm glad I don't, but I just know that I survived it. And when I've done my revisits with the neurosurgeon, still I get MRIs every 2 years now, and the CME still shakes his head and says, I don't know how I don't know how you're sitting here, much less able to talk to me and, drive yourself here. So very lucky, very lucky. I think that going back through my story, I can point to a bunch of different times where there's just no reason why I survived this or that, but I did. So here I am.
Yeah. And going through these experiences of luck, is there anything that, especially something similar to, going through like a stroke, is there anything that affected in your life, your perspectives, your outlook on life?
Oh, I definitely think so. You often hear people say after they've been through something, like a near-death experience, that people often say, and I think this is true for me, things that maybe would bother you were fairly trivial in the past. I find myself asking in my head the words, how important is it? How important is this to be worked up over? Or
how important is it?
Kind of like the life is too short mentality.
Yeah.
Especially, I'll tell you, it's actually a good fallback when I find myself really kind of dwelling on something. And then when I ask myself, like, how important is it? Or in 200 years, who's going to care about this? It's kind of funny because I've never been able to answer, oh, this is really important. Or it's funny, the stuff I get stuck on. But I have found myself doing that. And it's about, how important is it? Life is just too short to be spun up. And I try to do a lot of reading on like Eastern philosophy and religions and things like that to just kind of keep myself at a good baseline. And I think that helps too, which is something that I think after experiencing a stroke is something I put more of a focus on.
Absolutely.
Just to not keep myself constantly keyed up and always ready for the next, battle or whatever. So just something I found helpful for myself. That's all.
Yeah, no, that's huge. And this is kind of as a side question just on your general process, and we'll keep going down this process. But, this podcast is called the Personal Process Podcast. I'm not sure if you've heard of the saying, trust the process, but you've had a lot of ups and downs, uncertainties, hardships, successes. There was probably times that you were like, oh man, I'm not going to survive this. Oh, this is just terrible. Knowing what you know now, knowing the experiences you've gone through, I guess, what could you share? Do you trust the process?
I think knowing what I know now, I would go back and listen to older folks a lot closer. I think I certainly could have made it easier on myself. So I would not recommend the process that I chose to do.
Yeah.
Because mine was I think a lot of bullheaded school of hard knocks. You can't tell me anything. I wish I was more teachable earlier on.
Right.
But as far as I do think, like I said earlier, I don't necessarily believe in coincidences. So when I look at my story and the way things have played out in the bigger picture, things tend to work out in the long run if I let it, if I get out of my own way. I find that looking back, a lot of anything that was hindering me was me. 100% of Tom's problem is usually Tom. So that's I think the perspective that just all those ups and downs have now provided me. Like, wow, I just didn't need to do all that, I just didn't need to do all that.
Yeah.
But I did. And so here we are. So I think that's probably been the experience of a lot of people who tried to sit me down and talk to me, at different points throughout my life that I just wasn't listening to. And I'm sure, there's somebody out there who's going to hear me and be like, whatever. And, sometimes you got to do stuff like it's been said to me that, Tom, you just had to bang your own head off that wall so many times until you start to do it. So. And if I'm not careful, I'll keep doing that. If I'm not careful, I think that's something that I need to stay vigilant. Probably, if I live to 100, I'll probably have to remain vigilant on that.
Yeah,
because I think I'm hardwired to do things the most difficult way possible. I think that I have a lot of mechanisms in place today to kind of stay vigilant about that. And I also my wife is also very good at pointing out when I need to unwind or to take a break. I tend to pack my schedule a little bit too much sometimes between the two jobs and the canine stuff and now getting a new puppy that she's like, how about a vacation?
That's awesome.
Here in Florida, I live very close. I'm only about a mile away from a nice, slow-moving, lazy river, and kayaking is one of my things. And she very often says, "Today's a great day. Why don't you take the kayak out?" And I'll kind of stop and be like, it is, and there's no reason why I shouldn't. But I was, I've got to change the blade on the lawnmower. I've got to do this. I've got to do that.
Yeah.
It has the ability to make me go, you know what? I'm dragging that kayak out. And that's been a great influence on me.
That's fantastic. It really sounds like the yin to the yang, right?
Yes, very much so.
Yeah. So, Tom, you mentioned the canine, and I think this would be a great point to transition into that part of your career. Were there anything that you would like to talk about prior to getting into that, or?
So, yeah, I had some experience with the veterinary world, and it had bounced around a little bit between, technician type jobs and stuff like that. And I've had dogs all my life, and one of the benefits of working for the department I worked for was I literally was walking down a hall one day and they knew I had this experience. So they called me in the office and said, the person who does the canine program is retiring and we need a replacement. We thought of you. What do you think? And that's how it happened. And next thing you know, I'm getting a dog and with zero experience doing this stuff. But the great thing with that is because it's such a subspecialty of training a dog for that purpose, is that I've had the opportunity to travel. I've made a lot of great friends in Mobile, Alabama, and Nashville, people who have canines that do the same thing with such a wide range of experience that I've now got to the point where I feel confident enough that I'm getting my second dog, and we will probably do most of the training here at home. And for me, that's almost like therapeutic. I think it's a great, I get that's such an enjoyment for me. My current dog is a Labrador. He's very laid back. The dog I'm about to get is going to be 100-mile-an-hour Belgian Malinois. So I'm kind of talk about a yin and a yang. But I get such a satisfaction out of working with them, and they frankly, I'm in awe of the ability they have. My Labrador covers about an acre of ground. He's 7 now, going on 8.
Wow.
And he can cover an acre of ground and never miss a victim. It's just incredible. And I've hidden 5, 6, 7 people in rubble piles and barrels and this and that and the other thing. And it's a really satisfying thing that I again stumbled across, and things just fell right for me. So I will do that well into retirement. My plan is to most likely retire up towards Tennessee and to continue doing the canine stuff as long as I am physically able to. And probably it doesn't take a lot of physical part to do the dog training. It does for bringing them through the agility courses and all that, but as far as the obedience and stuff like that, I have found that whatever drives the dog is makes training very, very easy, very simple. It's not physically demanding. It's really a big mental chess game. So I think I'll be able to do that, well into old age if I make it that long. So.
All knock on wood, my friend. You survived a stroke and you stayed at home for 2 days. The cards are looking good. So, Tom, do you have any, and if this is completely asked on the spot, so no pressure if not, do you have any really weird or interesting stories with regards to, the search and rescue that you had right with your career with the canine?
It's funny that I think it's not necessarily of somewhere I had to go or something I had to do with the dog, but the whole process of getting a dog and trying to sort through good advice and bad advice, and sometimes what I felt was just completely inhumane advice. I had a person, a career dog trainer, tell me that the way to teach, one of the things you have to do is teach a dog from a full sprint within so many paces to come to an emergency stop.
Right.
It was recommended from a dog trainer that I tie like a clothesline to the dog and put it around a stop sign, call him, and then yank it. And I'm not going to do that. I've never been the big fan of compulsion training, but to filter out all of the different methods and bad advice. And I've always felt that, the whole positive reinforcement stuff with the dogs, is way more effective. And I see, like with my dog, his name is River. With River, he has never really had anything other than positive reinforcement. So what I see in him, as far as his ability to do the job he has, or the agility or the obedience, any of that. It's just been so solid based on not doing negative stuff with them. So I think that it's not necessarily funny, but to try and sort through to separate the wheat from the chaff, of what's valid advice, what's not, for something I had zero experience doing. I just gravitated to what sounded like it was, a more kind way of doing it, and very compulsory. A whole lot of reading, and I've got a whole bookshelf over here full of different books as far as canine training and this and that and the other thing. And the amount of people I've gotten to meet in all these different states of going to these different rubble piles and stuff have been, it's been an experience that it's rewarding, it's exhausting, it's sometimes frustrating, it's all that rolled into one. And for me, it suits me perfectly. So I love it. I would never do anything different. And as far as my experience is, I try to avoid as much as I can of any of the politics associated with that. I think that on a bigger level of whenever you get into federal level or state level type things, that politics and things like that tend to get in the way. So I've made my dog a local asset. If they want to utilize him at a state level, by all means they can call, but I just won't participate in the whole jumping through hoops and politics of it and all that sort of stuff. I just won't. It's mostly for my enjoyment. Even if the fire department didn't have it as a program, I would still continue to do it, just on my own. So that's sort of the in and out of my odd stories with dog stuff.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I mean, I'll ask one more question about this, because I'm actually very interested in it. Yeah. I've personally never been through, an earthquake. Thank God, I'll knock on wood on that one, or any sort of natural disaster to the magnitude of, just demolishing a town or a city. How are people feeling, that are like trapped under rubble or trapped under any sort of debris? Like, when you find them, like, what's that experience like?
I mean, obviously when people realize that help is coming, if it's not been a long time to where they're still have all their faculties, I mean, I'm sure the overriding emotion is gratefulness and excitement of come and get me. I've been lucky. I've not really had to go to, I've had some colleagues that have went to Haiti and into the mudslides out in Washington, and just nothing but tragedy and not very many survivors. I've been lucky that here in Florida, hurricanes are really the biggest thing, and there's a lot of warning for them. And so most of the damage is often property damage. It's been a long, again, knock on wood, it's been quite a while since, the real damaging ones have come directly to Florida. Poor Louisiana, on the other hand, just can't seem to get away from hurricanes. So we just sent a bunch of folks up to North Carolina, actually, for to help out with that sort of storm damage and things that happened up there. So I know whenever people have help coming that they either didn't anticipate or didn't really feel like was going to be there for them, I think it's probably the greatest day of their life. You know what I mean? I hopefully never can experience firsthand what it feels like to be under something, but that's why I feel like it's so important to be, and it applies to EMS as well. It's like, you're going to see difficult things, but you actually have a hand in fixing or helping it. And, to me, that's just super, super rewarding. So,
yeah, that's awesome. So Tom, what happens next? Like right now, this is something that you're still doing, obviously, but you were mentioning that you're teaching as well. So do you mind going into that? What inspired that? How is that going?
Well, going back to when I said I've always had like a big, thirst for soaking up information and stuff like that. I felt like whether it was learning some of the veterinary stuff or learning paramedic things, I had some instructors that were less than engaged, less than knowledgeable, taught bad things, wrong things, bad habits. And I thought it was a giant disservice. So
you wanted to do better.
It kind of served as motivation that I felt like the second school I got put in after getting hired with the fire department was more or less a self-taught course.
Right.
And if I didn't have all the veterinary background as far as body systems and physiology and things like that, I would have really probably struggled as much as I saw some of these other classmates doing. I just felt like there was a better way. I felt like there's a way to teach, especially some of the topics that I wind up teaching, where they understand it rather than memorize it. Because when they know why we do certain things, then it makes how we do certain things a whole lot easier. So especially when it comes to medicines or procedures and things like that, or the way the heart works or the way the heart responds or any of that sort of stuff. And to me, there's a certain amount of instant gratification when I see that light bulb go off and suddenly understand it. And, this was all Greek to me a minute ago, but now, I got it. And that's extremely satisfying to me. And, I think that the same element is there with the dog. Yeah. But it's more on my end. It's like when I finally understand how to get him to do what I want, because all I had to do was find the right method to do it. And, I get that instant gratification. And I think it's the same with students. I teach CPR recertifications, and I teach that at every level because everybody from a cardiologist down to a nurse's aide has got to take that same course. Yeah. When they fill out the post-class evaluations, when they put things like, I really learned stuff today, and it's, somebody who's been in the business for 20 years, to me, that's extremely satisfying. It means I'm doing something right. And I've got a lot of, I do that teaching independently. I don't work for a school. I teach as an independent instructor for the certifications.
Good on you. Wow.
Yeah. And it's kind of good because I can make my own schedule and all that other stuff in between everything else that's, going on. But that's just it. It comes down to a lot of gratification. I see them get it. I feel like I'm delivering something that I was very frustrated with when I was in school, learning topics that were just, completely foreign. So I see it too. Like I did for a while work for the university here, teaching the same stuff, one of the big 4-year universities, and to see these first year med students come in and just have no idea what they were looking at. And at the end of the course, they're walking out like, okay, yeah, I get it.
That's fantastic, Tom. And sorry, I don't want to take away from this, but you have your own, course. Do you want to promote it? And we'll get into all your promotions at the end, but just specifically right now.
Yeah, well, not necessarily mine. I do work. There's a couple, especially between the Southeast and the Northeast. There's a couple different agencies that are really, whether it's a Red Cross or American Heart or this one or that one. I don't want to push one over the other. What I would promote is for folks, even whether they're civilian lay people, and just have an interest for family members, or if you're in the supermarket and something bad happens, is I will promote that the more people who know CPR, the better.
Exactly.
So even if you can find a layperson course, you don't need to be a medical professional. It's certainly not rocket science. We're pushing on a chest and blowing air in and out. And the air is optional. So it's a great thing. I can tell you from being a EMS, the difference between survival undoubtedly is quick, high quality bystander CPR. It doesn't matter if we get there 5 minutes later and do the most impressive interventions in the world. If they've not had anything in the first 5 minutes, there's no chance. So the more people who know it, the better. So if there's one thing I'll promote, it is learn some CPR.
Do you think that CPR should be taught in schools?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I could think of at least 3 other things I could substitute it for that we could just toss.
Shoot them in.
Get rid of.
What do you think? What are the 3 things?
I just think that there's courses in high school that just there's just no need for in the regular world. For kids going to college and wants to take trigonometry, great. But if he's planning on going to a vocational school, by all means, let him take a CPR class. It's only
or at least have it as an option. Yeah.
Sure. There's a couple high schools here in my area that actually have EMT programs.
Really?
And I think that's great because these kids come out of their senior year ready to take a state test or maybe can take it prior to graduating. And that's just awesome. But there's only 2 in the entire area. There's over 1 million people in my county. So I think they're off to a great start. I think, again, as time goes on, they're on the right track. So
Yeah.
I think the field of healthcare, and especially, fire, police, fires, something that I think the building codes are getting better and all that. There's less and less fires, but as far as the all hazards responder model, it's not going away anytime soon. So the career demand is out there for sure for someone who's, just coming out of high school.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And great message. And yeah. So Tom, is there any segment of your life that we haven't dived into that you would like to dive into?
Other than the ones I've intentionally left out?
Bringing them in. Kidding.
No, when I told you in the Reddit response that my friends joke with me and tell me I should write a book, it's funny because we'll be sitting around the breakfast table or the dinner table at the fire station, and some story will come up, and he'll be like, "Is there anything that you haven't had, go on or happen to you?" So I don't know. There's a million things. I have a very long and complicated story, but I kind of glossed over some things, and some of that I did on purpose. But the important thing was, I think, finding answers to the things that were negative and capitalizing on the things that were positive. And ultimately winding up somewhere where I'm just content and, willing to go get on a kayak every couple of days.
Yeah.
That seemed a long way off at one point. So, now I'm just, I've got not that long to retirement. I'm going to be one of those people who I will say that I will be perfectly happy doing nothing. That's probably not true at all. But I'm very much looking forward to it. And I'm just trying to get to the finish line as far as that goes, and to try to get my ducks in order. I had bought a house in a rural part of the state about almost an hour away from my job. And I did that on purpose. It's, I appreciate the commute. I purposely use that hour on the way in and out of work to sort of decompress and process and listen to podcasts.
What's your favorite podcast right now?
I bounce around, actually. I listen to a lot of technical EMS ones, but the ones I listen to for just kind of goofs or for fun, Stuff You Should Know is great. I have, let me see, I got in my, I also, I'm a sucker for like the 48 Hours in 2020 and Dateline NBC, all those. I have a whole lot of Buddhism ones and a lot of true crime. So it really depends on what I'm for at the time. I could, put on something about mindfulness if I'm looking to decompress and chill, or if I'm just looking to be entertained, I'll maybe put on something true crime wise, or Stuff You Missed in History Class. The 2 ladies that host that podcast are great. And there's a whole bunch of them. I'm also a bit of a history nerd. So there's one called The Ancient World that I think a lot of people, a lot of people who listen to it get drawn in without expecting it. So, just being, in general, I'm a nerd, so I'll pretty much listen to anything.
That's fantastic. You got a whole variety of lists, nice and diverse. So,
and Frontline, PBS Frontline.
Beauty.
That's a great one.
So, Tom, I think we've gone into your story. We've got to see the parts that you want to share at this moment in time. We've seen the upbringing, we've seen the transition, we've seen the outcome, and we've seen how, for example, your start in life was a little bit rougher. So you went into a career in the Marines, get a little bit more structure, and, that showed you certain things that you liked about yourself, and it, shaped who you are in a certain way. What message would you have to the audience and to the viewers of this podcast?
I knew I would get a question similar to this at some point. So the best I think I could say is, I almost feel like I'd be wasting my breath to say, listen to what older people have to say, because I was told that a million times. But going back to what I think it's maybe paraphrasing something I said to you early is, I wish I had realized earlier on that I didn't need to do everything the hardest way possible. So,
Right.
what I would say to any of your listeners is take it easy on yourself.
Yeah.
I was very hard on myself early on in life, and throughout my 20s, even my 30s. I don't think it was until my late 30s I started making an effort to start taking care of myself in a whole body sense, body, mind,
Absolutely.
spirit, the whole thing. And my experience on the other side of that is it's just led to me being a more happy, complete, content, because I spent most of my younger years being completely restless, completely irritable, completely discontent, completely, just ready for the next battle and keyed up. And I don't think it was until my late 30s that I shouldered a little bit and, take that deep breath. So I don't think I took the best care of myself, or I was really that kind to myself early on. And that's what I would tell people is really just be a little kinder to yourself. And, when there's an easier solution, maybe consider that.
Yeah. So, Tom, I think without further ado, what are your, social media links, any handles you want to give out, any shout out at all? Take the stage.
Well, I don't really have any promotions to do other than I would, I do know that a lot of people live in rural areas that have rural EMS that is solely reliant on either donations and volunteers. I think if anyone has an interest, what I would like to promote is get out to your local EMS place, find out what it's about, find out what they need. And if it's something you are considering, for me, it was life-changing. So I think it's worth exploring if somebody has an interest in it. And I know that places in rural areas, both fire and EMS, are really, really struggling to find enough volunteers and stuff. So, granted, I'm a little biased towards these things, but that's what I would promote, is get out there and explore it. And maybe it'll be beneficial to both you and the organization.
Yeah, and that's a huge piece of advice. Learn a little bit about yourself, help your community, and learn how to develop contentment through volunteerism. Yeah, I mean, that's fantastic. And thank you so much for mentioning that. Thank you so much for your service. Thank you so much for being on our podcast. And we wish you well in your future endeavors. And we hope that you actually do end up writing that book, because I'm interested to read it myself. So let me know once that comes out.
Maybe in retirement.
Yeah. Well, I'll still have an email by then. So you shoot me a message and we'll get to reading that one. So anyways, Tom, thank you so much, and we wish you the best.
Thank you.
Hey guys, I'm back after another amazing episode with another amazing guest. We hope we added value into your life and you took away some tips that you could add to your tool belt and fuel your process forward. If you do know any friends or family members who would enjoy the same value that you got today, we'd really appreciate if you told them and let them know about us. And, if you could also subscribe and rate the podcast, well, that would just be fantastic. If you did all three, well, you'd really fuel our process forward. So thank you in advance. And always remember, trust the process.